Hello, my name is Jennifer Teganye, and today is February 18, 2023. I'm here with Citlali as part of the Chicago Youth Movement's Oral History Project. Thank you, Citlali, for making the time with me to sit with me today. Do I have the consent to record this interview?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Citlali, we could just go ahead and start with you telling me about your childhood and your family background.
For sure. So I was born in Mexico, in Guanajuato, Mexico in 2001, and my parents migrated to Chicago with me and my two other siblings, when I was 1 year old, 1 years old. So that was just September 2002. They arrived in Chicago. Um, in Back of the Arts, and I grew up in Back of the Arts. It's a predominantly Mexican and immigrant community, and has been historically an immigrant community. Before it was predominantly Polish. And yeah, they moved to Back of the Arts because we had family there already. My mom's cousin, and so my family is made up of me, my five sisters, and an older brother. Currently, I live with my parents and my five sisters. My older brother lives with his family of his own. And yeah.
Awesome. So is that house still in the back of the yards, or have you moved and lived in other Chicago neighborhoods?
I moved out of Back of the Arts when I was 10, when I turned 10. And so to Chicago Lawn. So I currently live in Chicago Lawn.
Okay. So could you, I guess, then tell me about the different institutions and structures within your neighborhood that just come to mind when you think back to your childhood and the places that you most frequented?
So in Back of the Arts, growing up in Back of the Arts, we like institution wise, I could think of the church. We used to go to church most frequently when I was little, and then we stopped going unless it was for someone's first communion or something. But yeah, we used to visit more than San Jose, it's called. I don't know if that's relevant. But yeah, I can't think of any other institutions besides school, and I went to a CPS school. Then I remember my mom used to be involved with the Herbalife circles. So I don't know if that also counts as an institution.
Yeah.
So just going to other friends' house, going to other women's houses with her friends and drinking smoothies, and yes.
That's awesome
But
to hear. So you mentioned school, and I'm curious if you could talk about your educational journey and the kinds of different schools that you may have attended throughout your time in the city.
yeah, so I went to CPS for most of my education. So when I was growing up in Back of the Arts, I went to James Hedges Elementary from pre-K to fourth grade, which is when I moved out. And the school population was reflective of the community population, which was also prominently Latinx. But there were also white and Black students. And I was in the bilingual program, which meant like for all my education at that time, at that school, all my teachers were bilingual. And that just looked like my classes were just in Spanish, honestly, because most of the students, that's the language they are comfortable with and speak at home. I would get challenged by by the fourth grade. I would be challenged a lot by my teacher, who would say oh, you need to get better at English, or you need to practice it more. At that time, the bilingual program was the goal was to move you out of the bilingual program into full English classes.
Mm.
And then so when we moved out, I attended Ashburn Elementary for fifth grade for 1 year. And that was a predominantly Black school and a predominantly English speaking school. Like the teachers I had were only spoke English. So, but I was still within CPS in the bilingual program. So what they did for Spanish speaking students who were in the bilingual program, they had like one staff member who would come like every other day and would just like take us out of our class for a period of the day to like work with us, which honestly like worked more to my detriment than like helping me.
Mm,
Uh, but yeah, and so I only went to that school for 1 year because my mom wanted me to attend San Miguel, um, which is a private Catholic school in Back of the Arts. So by then I was not living in Back of the Arts anymore. So I would have to um take take the bus or get a ride to school every day. It was like a 15-minute drive and a 30-minute bus ride.
mm,
And so San Miguel, like I said, is in Back of the Yard. So I was going to school with all the same like classmates I had in Hedges Elementary, so all Latinx students. Um, but all the staff were white. Unless besides like a few other Latinx teachers or staff members. Yeah,
mm,
but they were all white, sometimes bilingual, mostly bilingual, but still like white. So it was like a culture shock for a lot of students who hadn't had all white professors
mm,
before, teachers before. Um, yeah, so that was 6th through 8th grade. Um, because they only have those years.
mm,
Yeah. It was just like a very small school. It was on top of it was one hallway, like literally, and it was just one classroom for each grade, and it's on top of a church. It's like dependent on like donations and funding, so it wasn't like the best funded school, but like I had some opportunities I wouldn't have had if
mm,
I didn't go there. So like I had more one-on-one attention.
mm,
Uh yeah, I hadn't really picked up a book before, like in CPS, like when I was going to CPS before. Yeah, so the one-on-one attention did help, but also like that, like not having teachers that look like you wasn't always that great.
mm,
Um, yeah, and then for high school, I went to Back of the Arts College Prep. Again, still living in Chicago Lawn, but getting a ride to school every day or taking the bus. And it's around the same area too. Like all these schools are like close to each other, just like a walking distance.
mm,
And again, I was going to school with the same people that I'd gone for years, and plus like new people. Yeah.
mm. Okay. Thank you so much for providing that context. And it must have been interesting to like go from, that public school into that private school and then going into a public school for high school.
Mhm.
Um, so before I guess we talk about your involvement with like No Cop Academy, Cops Up CPS, I'm curious if you could tell me a bit about how you first got into community organizing.
Um, so yeah, that question I had a little, I was trying to like pinpoint like when I would say like when I got involved, but I guess like when I started to be like more vocally active, like more active or like activism, just distinguishing activism from
Mhm,
community organizing, I guess I would say was like my freshman year with this club I started or helped start called Dream Pursuers.
mm,
Um or for undocumented students and allies.
mm,
And yeah, and it was just formed for a space to have a space where like undocumented students and allies could like speak, especially because so that was 2015 and there was like, Trump running for president and then getting elected and a lot going on, like threatening undocumented immigrant rights.
mm,
And so that, yeah, that was my first involvement, I would say, like with activism, because I started to like um take advantage of a platform to like at my school to like speak about my experience being undocumented and what I was observing.
mm,
uh yeah, so we would have like this annual thing called Coming Out of the Shadows, which stems from like like it's like stems from the history of or undocumented immigrant organizing in Chicago. Uh, so youth activists in Chicago started this because they like realized the connection between being undocumented and being queer. And so kind of like coming out of the shadow, coming out of the closet, they realized they were also like hiding their undocumented identity, which was like in turn like keeping them more I guess their communities more susceptible to being like exploited, right? And instead like coming out and talking about what you're going through so that like you can support each other. Um, so raising awareness, basically, that was the point.
Okay.
And then, so that kind of got me exposed to other things going on. So Student Voice Committee is something I got involved in as a junior. And so Student Voice Committee would focus on working on school policies or addressing certain school policies that weren't like working for us as students. So our school like banned food. The like administration would ban like water, food, and we were kind of like meeting with administration and like bringing those concerns like that students had about certain policies because they were like the main issue we identified was like a lot of these things were being put in place without talking to us first. So that's kind of what Student Voice Committee was like working on. And then so with Student Voice Committee, we would get help from a youth organizer who would come in from the Brighton Park Neighborhood Council. And BPNC has like youth organizers that work with various high schools that have clubs similar to Student Voice Committee. Yeah. And so through BPNC, like that kind of expanded my involvement outside of school. And kind of they would try to plan meetings where like high school students that they were working with could like meet each other and talk about the issues that they're working on and like learn about other things happening around the city. Like early on in my involvement, one of the things was the closure of 5 schools in Inglewood, and just talking about like all these issues going on within our schools and like demanding more funding. Yeah, and then eventually another thing I got involved with through BPNC was no cop as well.
Okay. Thank you so much for providing that context. And it seems like your organizing started from a very beautiful and like more localized project. I'm curious, I guess before we start getting into like No Cop Academy and what that work looked like, you mentioned SVC as being like one of the things that you were involved with. Like, how did that come about in your school? Was it a student-led initiative? And like, I guess what were the dynamics within that space for you?
So like I said, I got involved as a junior, but the club had started like earlier on, probably when I was a freshman or before, because the school itself was also very new by then. But it was still a relatively new club, and the way they started was like they sent out or they conducted surveys, um, student-based surveys to ask students basically like, oh, what do you think about certain issues, just to identify an issue to work on, like what do students want to see improvement in. And I think what we saw was just like certain school policies, like the food and water policy, and then also like students not feeling safe around the school. And I think maybe like, yeah, I'm probably not remembering it exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe also relationships with teachers. I don't know, because after that so I wasn't there for like the conducting of the surveys, but I was there when like they were planning like I had a certain name, but I forgot, but basically like a meeting or a day of like workshops where like where students would like student voice committee would organize certain workshops for teachers and have them come in, teacher development day basically, but instead we're like the ones giving like the workshops and talks. And yeah, so that all came from like those initial surveys, and started a lot of conversations among teachers. I think especially like since a lot of them were not from the community or were white, just having them like realize, I don't know, certain things like their power dynamics and stuff. Um, like how to have certain conversations with students as well. Um, and yeah, so yeah, that's the thing with one of the things we did. Um, what was the question again? So I'm sure that we're staying on track.
No, you answered the question.
Okay.
And I guess like moving forward from that, could you talk about that getting involved in No Cop Academy and like what your initial perceptions and experiences were working in that movement?
Okay. Before I got into that, I wanted to add more about student voice committee.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I feel like another thing that I observed was just like the difference in involvement um as I like from my junior to senior year and then when I left.
Mm,
Um because eventually the teacher who was supporting with the helping with the club, Ms. Zing, she eventually left because she wasn't feeling like supportive from admin because there
mm,
I don't know, yeah. SVC just gave me insight into like a lot of things happening administration wise. I'm like, yeah,
mhm,
there's just like no support at any level, or like there's like favoritism with teachers as well.
mm,
Um, and yeah, there was just like a lot of issues. Towards the what I appreciated about Ms. Singh though is just like her letting students like take the lead.
mm,
Um, yeah, and then eventually so it was very student based. It was also different types of students getting involved. Like, I liked when it was like a safe space for students that would get picked on more by admin or security and have
mm,
more trouble. And like one of the other things that came up my senior year was a lot of students getting pushed out
mm,
by admin. Like you just saw like a more like selective culture coming through. Like it was supposed to be a neighborhood school, even though it's a college prep school. Like there was just certain students that were having like a harder time from admin, including my cousin who didn't even get to graduate, even though she was in her senior year.
mm,
So that was very frustrating. But yeah, just like sort of like the things that came up from being an SVC and like having those connections and like a deeper understanding of like what's going on within the walls of
mhm.
faculty arts.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's it. And then eventually also another project was just like because of that trying to work towards like a restorative justice, like trying
Mm,
to integrate that into the school, but like instead of listening to us, because the teacher just, I mean, the principal just didn't have a good relationship with us. If they would just like co-op some of the things we'd be working on and like try
okay.
to do something very superficial. But yeah,
Mm. No, I think that that's very important. Do you want it? I mean, if you want to, we could talk a bit more about those experiences too, right? That existed, but like with administration, and you mentioned like security. What did that look like within that school community?
um, I feel like I can go into that like when you ask me about like education and activism. I think
Mhm.
that's the
Yeah,
question. Yeah, yeah, maybe I can. Yeah,
yeah,
later.
yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about kind of your involvement with No Cop in the initial stages and like what that experience was like?
Yeah, sure. So no cop, I got involved again as a junior, pretty sure 2017 was like junior, I think so.
Mm.
So 2000, September 2017, after one of the SVC meetings, which were on Wednesdays. Wow, I remember everything so clearly. Um, there was like this art art party, art building party for NOCOP afterwards. And so the youth organizer for SVC, Olivia, invited me and my friend Veronica, who was also involved with SVC and was one of the people who started SVC. So she invited both of us. I wasn't really sure what it was. I was like, okay, like I hadn't heard of the campaign before, but she invited us, and there was food, so that was nice, and there was art. And yeah, and like I just took away like some resources, some educational resources, like zines and buttons. And that was like my first interaction with a lot of like the NOCOP like organizers,
Mhm.
and like learning what it was. And then I think I don't know like what happened in between then and when I went on this like retreat or trip with BPNC folk and Asada's daughters folk to Tennessee. Um I don't know if you heard of this thing called the Highlander place, but it's like a political education school kind of.
Mhm.
And that was a pretty exciting opportunity to go to, just like learning about um the history of organizing in the US, and yeah, just like building that community between BPNC
Mhm.
youth um and Asada's daughters, which would like continue on through NOCOP, like even up until now, like even after NOCOP, like that um relationship or connections.
Mhm.
Um yeah, and then another addition to my involvement was like going to weekly meetings, which were again every Wednesday after SVC, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and just like getting involved with the planning out of like actions and like the direction of NOCOP. Debbie like makes this thing. Debbie is one of the like founders or like organizers of the campaign. Like makes this like distinction that it was like youth led but adult supported. And that's true. Like besides like the meetings that you would have, it's not like we were planning everything, but like a lot of it came from like there was like committees. I think like the research committee and all of this that were like there were like components going on all the time, like helping move the campaign forward.
Mhm.
But as youth, we would come to these meetings every week and have every week and have an agenda and kind of like decide like oh the actions, and also like there was a lot of education of city council was one of the components, just learning who are aldermen were and like their stake in this decision of like their support for the Cop Academy, their support for Rahm Emanuel,
Mhm.
since it was like his idea and his politics. Um, yeah, and that was just like very helpful background education to have, to understand like that's why we're to understand like oh who we want to target,
Mhm.
like the messaging of our campaign, our like rallies as well. Like we started to do rallies, disruptions of fundraisers and being like, oh, what side are you on?
Mhm.
Type situation. But yeah.
Mhm. That's a really good, like, detailed kind of description of the work that you guys were doing. Um, I guess I'm curious, like, if you could describe to the best of your ability, like, what a day would have looked like when engaging with that work, um, or like what a meeting would, how would it would be structured and how it would go.
I don't think I could like remember exactly. But we would have an agenda, we would review it at the beginning. I like every meeting it would be different people in attendance, like
Mhm.
or who were leading it. Like eventually the meetings were also being led by the youth involved. But I feel like the most like the people that I saw most stepping up because they were there from the beginning were like you would be with Asada's daughters.
Mm.
Um yeah, and so doing icebreakers at the beginning, like getting to know each other still.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I feel like every meeting was kind of different. Like the main thing I remember was like the education component of learning and getting familiar with city council.
mm,
Um, maybe oh, like I remember one meeting was like learning about direct action. Like
mm,
different meetings will look differently. Some of them were like more education oriented for people who were just getting involved. Like I
mm,
remember Paige teaching us, Paige, who used to be like the founder of well, is the founder, used to be the director of Masada's Daughters.
mm,
Um, would like direct a lot of educational workshops on like direct action and organizing, and like having that background to start like planning out our actions, or talking about like, oh, this is coming up, like when the, I don't know, like if there's like any exposure opportunities,
mm,
or parades going on in Chicago, like having people show up, or like having people to train to like talk to media. Uh,
mm.
yeah.
Okay. So could you kind of describe then the overarching like mission and goal of the movement to someone who may not be familiar with it, before we kind of dive into like some challenges, and experiences that y'all had when working against people with power?
So the goal of No Cop was to stop the police and fire training academy that was planned to be built um, on the west side in West Garfield Park, and it was a $95 million like development project. Ended up being more, but just advocating wanting to stop that, and having that money relocated to communities. It was like a very large thing to take on, and eventually we lost. Like the vote. Okay, I feel like that answers your initial question, but yeah.
Yeah. So I guess then, what were the challenges that you guys encountered, and what were the dynamics, when kind of opposing something against, political actors and officials in the city?
Um, I mean, I guess the biggest challenge is like we're taking something on that's like bigger than us, and like starting conversations, or like starting or wanting to give more exposure to these conversations that have been going on, or like concerns of like, our communities are largely disinvested in. I guess that wasn't really a challenge, right? Because people were already like feeling like that. So that was one of the benefits or advantages. Yeah, advantages of like having uh being able to have different people like get behind this demand.
Mm,
Um and yeah, like again, like like we weren't able to stop the no cop the cop academy, even though we got like a few like votes that were for us, um a few votes that were against the cop academy,
mm,
or just didn't vote at all.
mm,
um but the majority still like voted for, which just showed like, again, like one of the initial challenges was like so many like the how city council looks like, right? It's not
mm,
progressive. Like just the culture of like favoring police funding
mm,
in our communities, like, and just increasing that, like, policing in our communities. um but yeah, and I think like, yeah, so those were some of the challenges, and like in
mm,
terms of dynamics, we were just like building and taking advantage of those relationships we did have with certain progressive aldermen, and having them like, I guess, again, like speak more on, and speak up on like what we were fighting for.
mm,
Again, with that messaging of like which side are you on, like making this like something to be polarized on, right?
Mm,
Like you're either for your constituents who are like demanding money for our communities, not police, or you're for the police and Rahm Emanuel and all
mm,
these very corrupt institutions. Um, but yeah, and so you saw that like through the rallies at the like disruptions of fundraisers, like making that very evident and like out there.
mm.
Um, yes. So I feel like it touched on challenges, dynamics, and what
Yeah,
else?
I think that was it.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I guess I'm curious, like you talked about how you encountered like Asada's daughters folks and were coming into contact with new people. Like, did you feel like organizing opened up different community building that you didn't have with other experiences? And like, if so, what was that like? If not, who were the kinds of people that you were encountering through this No Cop Academy work?
Yeah, I definitely think another benefit, again, like putting the biggest loss, or not the biggest loss, but like we lost our main goal, right? But there were a lot of benefits and good that came out of it, and one of them was like the relationships and the connections with not even like across organizations, because it's like even beyond like our organization name, like having that deep understanding of like where like we're coming from and stuff. Like I don't think if I hadn't involved, I think if I hadn't been involved with No Cop, I wouldn't have you know, met as many different people. Like this was like an outlet for me to meet people from different sides of the cities, just because of how, like people characterize Chicago as being like very segregated, so there's like less opportunities for that. And even then, like the environment of like where you get to meet people like that are conductive to us speaking about what's going on in our neighborhoods and just understanding like the different issues in our neighborhoods, but also the good in them. And so I guess one example, like to paint the picture, like after the campaign ended, like after the vote, um that summer,
Mm,
2019, yeah. um I did an internship with AFSC, which is like one of the supporting organizations of the campaign.
mhm,
um and with so it was me and like other youth who had been involved with No Cop, um who were either Asadas, so one Asadas youth, one other BPNC youth, and then Destiny Harris, who's not really tied to any organization, but like she was like that West Side representation that like, just like advocating for everything like that she's been through and stuff. Yeah, so very iconic individual.
mhm,
And we so we were like working on like city budget stuff, but we were also working together with Asada's Daughters and their summer program. So around that time, their headquarters had been burned down. So I think they're located in Woodlawn. And yeah, so they didn't have a space to meet, or like a physical space to meet for their summer programming, but we would meet in the Asada's Daughters garden.
mhm,
And so like our summer programs kind of like joined together, just I guess because it was gonna be a lot, right? Like doing
mhm,
programming, sun, rain, like through everything, and like bugs. It was terrible, but I feel like it was kind of cute that we all like were there together
mhm,
through it. So the facilitators were Debbie and Paige.
mhm,
Um and yeah, we because in light of like their headquarters being burned down, just like learning about more about U Chicago's role in displacement in the community,
mhm,
and having leaders and community organizers, elders like from Woodlawn, like talk about that history.
mhm,
Um, yeah. So that's what that summer looked like, and just like showing that how like the importance of those connections that had been built
mhm,
throughout the campaign. And then I guess another example being the Cops Out CPS campaign
mhm.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like I want to hear more about that organizing that followed your involvement in No Cop Academy. If you could kind of just describe the work around budgeting that summer you mentioned, and then also talk about Cops Out CPS, again, the goals and missions of that as well.
Yeah. So with the internship, like I mentioned, we were gearing our attention towards you know, the city budget. There was
Mhm,
like a campaign going on at that time. I'm trying to remember the name. Reimagine Chicago, I think it was
mm,
called.
okay.
It was like a coalition, more of a coalition, but different orgs.
Mm,
So through like the internship, we were just like learning about, you know, the conversations that were going on through that coalition, and which was just like wanting to push for a budget that was more progressive, like,
mhm,
you know, reimagine Chicago was a more progressive space that works for the people. um so again, like, that shows how like that demand of defund police when our
mm,
communities were was like transitioning and onto like different campaigns, and like was being more of a conversation people were having more. Yeah.
mm,
And even with like CTU strikes and everything, like that also happened afterwards, and you could also see the influence of no cops demands of like, again, policing is not like geared towards our safety, like asking for all these other things, that resources that are actually for our safety.
mm,
um and then no cop um kind of, even like, even before no cop, I mean cops at CPS, even before no cop, like, you know, a lot of the things I was doing with BPNC and working with other high schools were kind of, you know, the beginning. There's just a lot of things that happened before cops at CPS where that were
mm,
like helping brew this
mm, mm,
campaign.
yeah.
Like just that messaging of like money for our schools, not police, was like there even before cops at CPS.
Mm,
um but yeah, and so one of the things we did during that summer 2019 with the internship was we filed FOIAs for two CPS and two CPD to
mm,
ask for the names of our school office of the officers in our schools,
mhm,
the school resource officers. Um, I think so. I did it. So back to the arts, Kelly, and just the other interns schools, and
mhm,
we found that I think CPS didn't have that information, and that was like a big thing. Like, oh, our schools don't know what officers are like in our building, and then CPS provided that. I mean, they were like, oh, you should FOIA CPD instead. We did, and we got the info. We ran it through CPDP, which is the database that holds a lot of like police profiles and their complaints.
mhm,
And we saw that a lot of the some of the police officers at our schools had like extensive complaints, and that
mm,
kind of just supported like some of the research that was already out there from like the inspector general, that like kind of raised red flags about the SRO
mm,
program, and how, yeah, just like, oh, this is something that needs to be like worked on.
yeah.
And yeah, and so that kind of allowed um like more people to interject into those things that CPD was like supposedly working on to address the OIG report, right? Like they were holding meeting, community roundtables and stuff, and supposedly like addressing the issues and getting community impact, just like
Mm,
as a front of them doing something.
yeah.
So even like being aware of that and attending those meetings and like raising those concerns. Um, and yeah, and then what comes out CPS, a lot of the youth organizers were already like getting involved with those conversations happening nationwide, like
Mm,
with, I'm trying to remember the national campaign for police, like the national campaign for
Yeah.
police free schools.
Yeah.
And so, and then having you know, those starting to have those meetings with youth that were already involved, or and also expanding it to more like the conversation to more youth and having more frequent meetings to start off that campaign. And by then I wasn't like that involved either, because yeah, that's when I started college.
Mhm.
But my involvement that summer just looked like attending the rallies or like being in on like a couple of meetings and conversations. But yeah, my by then my involvement started to like decrease. But yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's a lot of beautiful work that you've been involved with. So thank you for those details. I guess I'm curious, what kind of your involvement with cops at CPS especially, kind of how was that a local kind of an experience that you had? Because I know some student organizers kind of worked more with their like local school council, and others were kind of more engaged on like a CPS citywide initiative. So I'm curious about that for you.
Yeah. So again, I wasn't that involved again when the campaign kicked off,
Mm,
besides attending some so some of the LLC meetings over Zoom for some schools, like,
mhm,
you know, just being in on like hearing what's going on, following up on the group chat, which kind of also like gave a lot of those updates, and then showing up at rally, starting to lose my words, rallies outside of the headquarters, and then also for my school, there was like I joined one of the planning meetings with like some of the students that were involved with SVC, or
mhm,
maybe I had a different name by then, but you know, just students that were interested. And um it, the same SVC teacher, who I think wasn't working there anymore. No, she probably still was.
mm,
But um yeah, like I wasn't going to back arts anymore, but like just sitting in on that conversation to see like what students were thinking, or just like to be there for support.
mm,
But it was mostly my friend Veronica who helped organize like the action tour around that, since she was working with BPNC as a youth organizer at that time. And so they organized a rally outside of the school. I helped with the flyer. I guess that's one of my involvement. One of the ways that I got involved. But yeah, so like it was just a group of students that showed up, not just back at the arts. I think there was like again like some of that like coalition building, like showing up, like of
mm,
other students from other schools showing up, and and yeah, we were just like, it was at the same time that the LLC meeting was happening, so kind of coordinating that to like show up and be like, oh, we're for Capital CPS. And our school and back of the arts did vote out the police, which was like just very surprising. Uh and I think that has to do with you know, having more student like having more students be aware of like, you know, there's this thing called the LLC, and like they're having these meetings and they're like deciding on this, and like having like making that space to talk about police in schools and stuff. And so essentially I feel like for back of the arts, the reason they were able to remove police was because of giving students that space to put out their concerns, and like organize, not because of like the principal or admin's concerns of like, you know, because even yeah, so that was like a very like great win, all because of student organizing, um and now, and then like maybe I'm getting off topic, but like going like forward like to the present, just how like for how everything has looked like until like
Mm,
now for a lot of the schools that remove police officers, it's kind of like backtracking,
mm,
because that happened when things were online. So 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 police officers weren't in the building anyway. So we're like, okay, we shouldn't even have like money
yeah.
going towards this. So yeah, just uplifting some of the concerns, right? That money schools weren't gonna be given an option to put that money towards other resources that they needed. You know, some schools were debating whether to remove officers, because then like, you know, that would be like one less resource that they would have. Um and yeah, and then even afterwards for schools that removed police officers, um CPS started to be like, oh, you need to create a whole school safety plan, right? Have conversations with your school, like create a meeting, like a committee to talk about like alternative safety practices.
Yeah.
And in back of the year, it's like when I reached out to students there, and the LLC member, representative for the neighborhood there, who is an alum, was basically like, oh no, yeah, it's trash. Like the teacher, like they basically threw out restorative justice out the window. Like they're not really thinking about these things anymore.
Mhm.
And for other schools like Sullivan, who I talked to as well, they were just like, oh yeah, a lot of teachers are like, with students coming back, or saying like, oh, we shouldn't have gotten rid of police officers. They feel like they don't have enough support with students. Like
Mm,
um, there started to be like more conflict among students there, and again, I'm basing this off of like conversations I've had with teachers and students. Like what they're observing is like more conflict, and people seeing that and being like, oh yeah, that's why we need police, instead of being like, oh, like we need to get on it and like install restorative justice and advocate for more mental health support and concerts in our schools, because obviously students are like dealing with all the shit of like having been online, and like the detriment to their mental health.
yeah.
So yeah, so those were even though I wasn't as involved in the campaign, right? Like as a college student, I started to be like, oh wait, like students are coming back to schools, so like we need to like follow up on like what's going on. And I kind of I wrote an article for like one of my classes on that.
Mm,
Yeah, so that's the way that I like initiated those conversations, and inquiries of teachers and students.
yeah. That's so, I mean, that's very interesting to hear kind of the impact that that organizing work had on you after you graduated from Back of the Yards, which I think transitions perfectly into my next question, which is like, what are ways that you think like your participation in youth activism and organizing in Chicago has impacted you? Kind of biggest lessons and the way it has shaped your politics.
Okay, let me just drink water real quick.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll tea. I have like a lineup of drinks,
No, you're so good.
coffee as well. Um, okay, so I would say the biggest lesson from being involved in student organizing was like the importance of relationship building.
Mhm.
Uh, that goes back to like everything explained with no cob, and having built a relationship with Asada's daughters.
Mm,
Because again, like all of those relationships, that's what like carries things forward. Like we lost the vote for no cob, but then there was like the cops on CPS, and everything's all reliant on like having built those relationships. Like,
mm,
and that, like that's like an actual thing. People have learned over time with movement building is movements aren't spontaneous, right? Like because of they're just because of over time, like coalition building. So when I say like my biggest value lesson learned being relationship building, it's not even yeah, it's just like that, the importance of interpersonal relationships. Like it's like that one-on-one's very important. Like yes. And even then, like there's still like a lot to learn
Mm,
of like how to navigate conflicts and all of that. That's like not always thought or like brought up in organizing, but can be like very important to this like how strong your campaign or movement is. Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so with that, like other lessons are like solidarity is very important again across different issues and um and organizations. Um but
I guess like on that note too, I'm curious if you can recall different like instances where you felt like there was like a lot of cross issue, um, like cross coalitions in that way, or like ways in which, yeah.
I guess I can talk about like I talked about before, like getting involved through like talking about my experience as undocumented um immigrant, but then
Mm,
I didn't touch on like immigrant organizing anymore. So I can, I guess, like immigrant rights organizing. So a lot of my immigrant rights organizing again happened through BPNC and getting plugged in with BPNC, and like that being a space to advocate for issues. But then also most importantly, OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportation.
mm,
Um, and again that was during high school,
okay.
senior junior year. One of the campaigns they were working on that I got to like help with or like do some work around was erase database, um,
Mm,
and and that was just a campaign to er- close or stop the Chicago gang database, um, because it went against the like welcoming cities ordinance and all of these things that were saying that Chicago was like
mm,
a sanctuary city.
mhm,
But then finding out right that like there's this loophole and it's also like present in schools and that ties in like comes out CPS, right? Like
mhm,
our schools are supposed to be safe as well, but we have police officers, they have access to these surveillance systems, right? Like they're like very well in a position to like further criminalize students, who whether or not they're undocumented, right? Like it just puts them at risk of like ending up in the gang database or yeah, or like just puts their communities at risk. So that like shows that as well. Um, yeah,
that's so
yeah, and
I
then
mhm, go ahead.
oh, and then I guess to put that to like speak on that and how like one of the lessons learned there was if I hadn't but been involved before my involvement with OCAD,
Mm,
it kind of like shifted or kind of like shaped my like politics
mm,
as well. Because before OCAD I was kind of like it, it introduced me or I was kind of fitting into like the dreamer narrative
mm,
of which is basically like good immigrant versus bad immigrant and like kind of like, oh, I'm a student, you know, I don't have a criminal record, like this shouldn't be happening to me type of situation instead of like, you know, like citizenship for all, like, you know, this is what our communities deserve.
yeah.
Yes.
That's I think that's beautiful, and even I remember being involved with some youth organizing pushing for the welcoming city ordinance, and like struggling with like future problems that arise in the city where it was clearly not a safe environment, not only for like undocumented or documented migrants, but also just like Black and brown people across the city. So
Hmm.
um definitely kind of relate and understand that point. I guess I'm curious, like, you talked about the political, like I guess the influence that youth organizing had on your politics and some of the biggest lessons you carried away from those spaces. I'm curious, how getting involved in all of that influenced your relationship with both Chicago and your neighborhood.
Yeah, so I always say how I don't really feel like I'm as plugged in like to the actual like neighborhood I live in, which is Chicago Lawn. Even though I lived here for like 11 years.
Yeah.
Yikes. But yeah, I
Do you feel
haven't
that because
done.
you're plugged into like back of the yards more because of school and all of that, or?
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I think like having that like home-based organization helps a lot too. Like the fact that like Brighton Park, so yeah, the two neighborhoods I've been involved in the most, I guess, because of that is Brighton Park and Back of the Arts, and
Mm,
last Chicago Lawn, because I didn't really know of any like orgs around here, and I guess I know of one, just like I already have those existing relationships.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I guess just um like always having that space that I like can come back to and like plug into and like especially with BPNC, like having built all of that.
mm,
Yeah, it's just like a strong foundation. Um and I guess the good thing about BPNC is that they like expand beyond like Brighton Park
mm,
neighborhood, like the Brighton Park neighborhood. Um and kind of um because they're more established and they also like have a lot of resources, but they also have a good history of like being able to like build um like build the organizing skills and involvement of their community
mm.
members, like doing a lot of grassroots work and having them show up as well. Um but yeah, I don't know, I feel like there's more I could do in terms of like being more involved with my community, like in terms of
Mm,
like aldermanic races and everything. Although like my alderman's David Moore and he's been like I think this is gonna be his second year or I'm not sure, but he's not really he never really has like an opponent either.
mm,
So yeah. Um trying to think like LLC, like the local school council the school like when that was going like my sister's elementary school
mm,
again wasn't involved as much as I could have been, but yeah. But
mm.
again, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I would
I,
say like my strongest relationship is with those two neighborhoods back at the arts and Brennan Park.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess like, did your perceptions and like relationship to the city, however I think you can define that, change or get shaped by your organizing in any way?
um, I would say yes, because just like being aware of like even that the West Side exists, and that and like learning its history, of this investment as well, and just like yeah, I guess the main thing that I've learned or has been affected by my involvement is just yeah learning that his like the Chicago history and how of politics and um understanding like those dynamics between politicians, how it has existed for years, and constituents, and how it's always like a fight for power and like resources and like wanting those community resources and just yeah, like
Yeah.
it's it's a historical thing basically, like learning
Yeah.
how the history of it impacts today.
Mm,
And yeah, and just we have like more progressive aldermen now that people running for aldermen who are tied to like who were organizers and activists before.
yeah.
Um yeah. I so um so in Back of the Arts right now, Vico's running, and she had reached out or I was reached out to like Canvas
Mm,
But I haven't had like I didn't end up getting involved again. And this is gonna like touch into something else, but just another thing like influencing my continued involvement. It's like dealing with or kind of trying to figure out like how like my organizing side and like my involvement with journalism.
mm,
Especially like since now I'm like, okay, this is something I'm actually trying to pursue.
yeah.
Um, right, like what careers can I get into? Like, what's like, will my involvement like to what extent can I get involved with that detriment, with the type of career that I'm trying to pursue? I know that I'm not trying to like work for Univision or CNN or anything like
Mhm.
that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
can speak more on that if you like to, but yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say like if you could go kind of I guess a bit into the way in which you feel that organizing experience influences that professional and kind of future aspirations you have in journalism.
Yeah. So, um, now I'm gonna like go back to the beginning and plug in journalism because
Yeah.
all this time I was just talking about like my student activism, but I've actually started writing for my newspaper in high school. Um, just because I thought, I don't know, it just seemed interesting, and I'm like, oh, this is something I could put on my resume. Um, and when it started to, and then I just started to get directly influenced by my like organizing, right? As I started to get more involved and aware about these issues. I was like, oh, these are like issues that I want my classmates and peers
Yeah.
to learn about too.
Yeah.
So like the school closures and like ICE raids and like all these campaigns, like writing about that in my school newspaper. And I was met with challenge at times from the teacher sponsor in my newspaper, even about like the way that I wrote about how I wrote things.
Mm,
Um, just like yeah, he would just nitpick certain things. I'm like, damn, like why?
mhm.
And like, but obviously he's right. He's just very like narrow, I guess, minded. I don't know. Um, I didn't really have like any knowledge when it came to journalism of how like those things could coexist. I just started to like become more aware of like, oh, maybe this is not a thing that I can start like continue getting involved with. But I mean, I applied. Obviously, like I wanted to because I applied to journalism programs, and that's why I went to the Paul because I liked their journalism program. Um, and and so I was taking all these like introductory journalism classes. Um, and they just felt like I was just not relating to them, and I'm like, what, So that brought a lot of questions towards my major as well.
Mhm.
And then eventually, yeah, I it all changed when I learned about this journalist named Lewis Raven Wallace.
Mm,
So my one of my mentors, Debbie, introduced me to him and to his work. So he wrote a book called The View from Somewhere,
mhm,
and he talked about like challenging objectivity.
mm,
um and then I was able to identify as like the root of like all these issues and challenges that I was having in conflicts of like, oh, my organizing background and my interest in journalism. And Liz is also comes from an organizing background, and so yeah, that helped me a lot. And I'm like, okay, there's actually like a space for me to do
yeah,
the work that I want to do.
yeah,
Like journalism has been historically like for our communities as well.
yeah,
Like the history of like Ida B. Wells and just all these
mm,
other people who weren't able to like be objective on certain issues. So
mm,
yeah, so I guess that kind of explains that. And so I was like back and forth on sociology. Should I just do like something in liberal arts instead of journalism so that I could still be involved with community organizing?
mm,
I finalized my major like last minute this as a senior, I mean, at least I was able to take like all these different types of classes. Like I have like enough experience, I guess, now. But yeah, I
Mm,
don't know. And so I guess I feel, I guess, more reassured to how I can utilize tools that I learned in like my journalism classes and my experience in organizing
yeah.
um, to work on like meaningful projects and plug into work that's already going on in the city.
Yeah. That's beautiful to hear. And I think even like kind of going off of that, um, kind of transitioning to a different section here of the impact that you feel your organizing had on your perceptions of formal education. You're kind of already kind of getting into that. But I'm curious, like throughout your work, early in high school when you were doing like SVC, right? And you mentioned working to campaign against like Rahm Emanuel's like school closures, right? So beginning from there all the way up through like No Cop Academy, Cops Out CPS, the budget work, right? I'm curious how you felt like all of like your relationship with school in general, right? Like was shaped throughout that engagement.
Yeah. So um, I definitely felt like I had like a couple teachers that were like adult allies or just support systems in high school, like three that I can name, or um, and then like the rest of it, man, I feel like I started to get cha challenged by more stuff as I got more involved in political work and
Mm,
organizing. Like as a freshman, when I was talking about being undocumented and advocating for immigrant rights, like no challenge, right? Like, yeah,
mm,
this is definitely something, that we can get behind. Like, obviously, no debate about whether undocumented immigrants who like is something that a lot of our students can identify with. Like, obviously, we're going to support them and support their organizing. Um, Even though, like, even the support for dream pursuers, like, could have looked better from admin, like, most of it, again, was superficial, like,
mm,
like, the photo ops of, the coming out of the shadows day and all of that, like,
mm,
but at least they weren't, like, challenging what we were trying to do in school. Because how could they? I mean, we are just, like, raising funds for, like, our scholarship and stuff like that.
mhm,
And then when I got involved with Student Voice Committee, yeah, like, I, like, felt like I guess more provoked to challenge even like security guards and stuff.
mm,
Um, or yeah. And but I like overall is very like, okay, these are my politics, this is what I advocate for, but
mm,
I didn't really even like give my teachers that much shit as much as they like gave me. I felt like they gave me
mm,
because there was like this group of like white teachers, white male teachers in my school,
mm,
um, who were especially like just critical of me and my friend Veronica.
mm,
Um, and and yeah, I I don't know, they would just say like the stupidest shit. um, am I allowed to curse?
yeah,
Okay.
no,
I
you
mean,
can
I've cursed.
go. Yes,
Okay.
you feel free to.
Um, One example, I guess that's gonna put everything in perspective, is so one of the rallies that Student Voice Committee did was against one of the protests was against the food policy, which was like you can't bring any food in school. Um we we first like met with our principal, like a one-on-one meeting to address this. And we were like, okay, these are our concerns. And what she told us was like, oh, well, the food policy, that's because like someone brought like a pound of wheat once and we found it in their locker and we're trying to prevent shit like that from happening, or like people bringing alcohol and water bottles and stuff. And we're like, okay, well, can you at least like communicate with us or like not try to like reprimand everyone like right away when something happens? and take this away from us. But yeah, and then they were met with force from us when one time, like, they randomly out of nowhere, because we have metal detectors that we go through every morning, but one day they like started checking backpacks and taking away food and putting it in plastic bags. Um and they didn't tell anything, they didn't say anything about this the day before, that they were going to check our backpacks, that they were going to take our food. They didn't say that we could have gotten our food. I'm pretty sure they threw it all away. And so a lot of students were pissed, not just student voice committee, but because student voice committee, we already had this space where we were talking about these issues. We're like, okay, let's start to plug in more students. We created a Facebook group, a Facebook group, like a private Facebook group, with students that were interested, because Back of the Arts already has like a student-based Facebook group, but this was for this issue specifically for students who were pissed and wanted to talk about it. And it was just like us going back and forth on like, okay, what do you guys think we should do, all of this. Eventually we settled on doing like a rally, a protest where we would the next morning bring apples, because they were taking away food. So like, if all students bring apples, they're all going to take our apples away, and it's going to look ridiculous, because by then, like, what admin was communicating was like, oh, we're doing this because you guys, there's a lot of littering, to prevent littering. They weren't talking about the concern of like drugs being brought in. They were just saying, oh, the school is very messy and you guys eat junk food anyway. And school and the food in the cafeteria is healthier type situation. It's what they're insinuating, which, like, first of all, I was vegan. I didn't want to eat the food in the cafeteria. And a lot of times it's like pizza and tater tots. Like, it wasn't even that healthy. And yeah, it brought up a lot of challenge. Students were mad, and I think the backpack checking had happened like on a Wednesday, and the rally had happened at the end of the week. So we had that in between time of like, it could have gotten out to admin that we're going to do this, and I think with it, like, there was a rat in your group, basically. And so when we came in that morning with our apples, admin had communicated, oh, we'll have a basket for your apples, and we'll have tape and markers to mark your apples. And so every person who came in through the metal detectors, like, put in their apple in the basket, and they're like, oh, you can get it in the office during lunch. And like, even then we're like showing all these swaths of their policies of like, okay, well, then people are taking up more time, like trying to like get their apple right. Like, this is not productive. Like, you guys are dumb. Yeah. And another component of the protest was also a boycott, like a 1-day like boycott of like not eating the school lunch. Yeah, I wouldn't like hang out in the lunchroom though. Like, I would go hang out in a teacher's classroom during lunch though. But I heard that the two white teachers from the group that I mentioned earlier that would always congregate in the middle of the hallway. Two of them, one of them's like an English teacher, and the other one's a history teacher, because of course. They went into the lunchroom to eat the school lunch in front of to protest the students' protest, is what they said they were doing. Yeah. So that just shows you how like disgusting their behavior is, of like they're the type to want to play like devil's advocate, like all this shit, just like not being supportive at all. And one of them was also like my sponsor, the newspaper sponsor. So yeah. So, but I guess then after that, we also had like a petition going around. Yeah. Eventually when we like gave the petition and we like went back to admin and we're like, these are our demands, they said, okay, well, figure out what the resolution was. But the main resolution for us is that they like came to us with like these are the rules instead of like doing some random shit. You know, they didn't check backpacks anymore. They were just like, no food is so no. It's it. You can only eat food in the lunchroom. It's basically you can bring food, but you need to eat it in the lunchroom. So basically, addressing their concern of littering. Well, if students are eating in the lunchroom, then you know there's no concern of littering elsewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then after that, the main thing was like, okay, well, you guys obviously suck at communicating with us, and just like continuing to want to work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that that example gives interesting insight into the dynamic. I'm curious, like, what the relationship was with like administration, and what role they played in these conversations and dynamics.
I mean, I guess like when I say administration, I mean like the principal and the vice principal.
Okay.
Some I think we have sometimes we would have two vice principals. At some points we had just one. I don't
Okay.
know how many we had in that moment, but yeah, I mean, obviously, like the fact that they implement that just shows how like they're just very reactive to
Mm,
things. Like we're gonna do this, we're not gonna consider like what you think or how you feel.
mm,
Um, but yeah, and I guess like the result of that what the campaign. I mean, the result of that protest and them giving us a response was like because we were just like I don't know. Um, showing that like enough students cared about this, which like afterwards conversations that came afterwards, some like teachers would try to like deny it. I don't know, they were just not being acknowledging of the like student work that went behind it. They'd be like, oh well, only a couple students were a part of the Facebook anyway, or like you
mm,
know kind of like trying to undermine it. But um yeah, eh, yeah, in terms of like admin relationship, like they responded obviously because we're calling it out, but
mm,
even then like moving forward, they're still like now working on the main issue, which is like having a relationship with students, because you know they're like not not acknowledging their faults like
mm,
fully, being like this is an issue because we're just like doing shit and
yeah,
not taking it into consideration, and just like even afterwards like continuous issues of certain students being picked on,
mm,
um, kind of insinuating to some students that they should like sign to like drop out instead of
mm,
encouraging them to like
mm,
yeah, like there was instances of that. That's what I meant earlier of like students being pushed
yeah,
out, is that instead of being yeah they were kind of like being geared towards dropping out.
yeah.
um but yeah.
Mm. I'm curious then, like, what was the dynamic as well with discipline, and security? And I'm curious if that played also into the pushing out that you witnessed.
Yeah, so in terms of the discipline again, like certain just like security, um just feeling I guess that it's okay, you know, to pick on certain students, just because if they have like a track record of like going to the office or track record of anything, like they'll just get picked on more. Or if they're like in the hallway, like that's yeah, okay. I'll put myself an example as an example, right? Because I was a visible student, and like my involvement in school was visible. Like
Mm,
um I was obviously involved in the newspaper. I would like hand out newspapers every month in the morning. I would like sometimes talk in the intercom. And so
mm,
even though I had this politics that would meet me with challenge from some teachers, right? That
mm,
would often be like uncomfortable conversations with white teachers. I wasn't being challenged for walking in the hallways like
Mm,
during lunch to go to a classroom or for like hanging around. Like I got less bullshit from that because I was relatively like seemed perceived as a good student. But for
mm,
other students, right, they were just automatically like just more criminalized, more, yeah, like I don't know. Like
mm,
these are the problem students. And
yeah.
it's usually students who aren't taking like DP classes or AP classes or any of that.
Mm,
And it just really sucks because again, like creating that more like exclusive culture within a school that the neighborhood community members like fought to be there,
mm,
right, like they wanted it to be a neighborhood school, and even though it ended up being a college prep school, like you know, it just sucks that that culture existed there. But yeah, I guess that's like the main relationship with security guards, and in terms of being like reprimanded, I guess like being sent to the office more if you're like wearing the wrong shoes or like was tucking in. I think shirts being tucked in was the thing maybe that we had to do. I don't remember. It would have been really stupid. Oh, one thing that happened once though, we were all the seniors were in the auditorium
mhm,
because like just senior things, you know, and our vice principal started off, or she just, I don't know what the meeting was about, but she wanted to dress uniforms, and she was like, "You guys need to set an example for like lower classmen, and you need to tuck in your shirts and do all of this because of the neighborhood you live in." That's essentially what she said. Is you need to be well presented, wear uniforms, tucking your shirt because of the neighborhood you live in. And she was just very blatant about that. I'm like, what the fuck? I
mm,
was just looking around like the fuck. But yeah, so that just
yeah.
shows you the like the other issue of like one of the things that caused a lot of conflict is wanting to separate the school community from the current community, which gave
Mm,
a lot of issues to students who were coming from the community and who, yeah, were just like just had different backgrounds, or like some of them were like gang affiliated and stuff, and just not getting enough support from admin and security, and were even just like being challenged instead of encouraged, and creating a safe space. um yeah.
What was the role you mentioned a bit earlier, I believe, restorative justice practices? What was the role of that in this dynamic?
So a lot of that was just like never got off the ground. Like we kept on trying to like work on something as BC. Like my senior year, I remember meeting a lot, like trying to create something. It just felt like everything was like placed on us, on, on us, like trying to figure that out. Right, like obviously admin knows this is something that we're asking for, that we want. And we just felt like we needed to um create something bullet like foolproof
Mm,
before presenting it, so it didn't have any holes, or it couldn't be challenged, or they couldn't like turn it into something else.
mm,
um but as we were trying to do that, like obviously, you know, they're going to try to come up with something else to, I guess, to make it something to dilute those efforts.
mhm,
And they ended up doing something that was like a there's a name for this, where they have like a group of students that they select that are in charge of mediating conflict within the school, like
okay.
school like conflict mediators. Students are in charge of that, and would you can start like poking holes at how that's that would
Yeah.
be an issue, right? Because like then you're essentially having these students be like I guess more targeted, like they're the chismosos, or like the
Mm,
working of the school, or you know. But they I think they try to seem to be like more inclusive with this approach by like reaching out to students, to students besides like the good students, or like the DP or AP students, you know,
mm,
students that I mentioned before who would normally get challenged by security, or who were like gang affiliated or whatever, just like having them more involved. but even they were like questioning of this because it was coming from admin, like, but yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so basically like throughout all of this work that you were involved with in high school and as we close out this conversation, I'm curious like what you're most proud of looking back and those years.
Okay. I think just like I mentioned before, even as a college student, I was still curious, right? Like I still had that tied to my school, like
Mm,
wanting to know what was going on, even though I had mainly been cut off by a lot of people that remained there. Like I didn't have that relationship. A lot of the teachers I did have relationships with had moved on to other schools, but when I
mm,
did reach out to certain students that were still there that I knew that were lower classmates when I was there, just having those conversations of like, even though they were identifying some of the same issues, and that was
mm,
discouraging, the fact that those efforts were still going on, and that I could see that they were influenced by the work of student voice committee, and Veronica and I, and just yeah, um that I guess, that wanting to see things be better, like still existed.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I would imagine too, like you had a similar experience having been involved in No Cop Academy and then seeing a newer generation of high school students joining in the Cops Out CPS movement, right? And
Hmm.
doing this work to this day. I'm curious like what you want current, more younger, like youth organizers in the city and future Chicago youth who kind of will work in like similar campaigns of like racial justice and education equity, what would you want to impart onto them and kind of share?
Um, I feel like the main things that you start feeling when you start being more involved in organizing as a young person is like these expectations from adults that lean you either which way, they just like try to like project a lot of their expectations onto you, whether like you're not doing enough or like why are you doing things like this instead of that, or and it's very exhausting.
Mm,
And then I feel like even now like seeing comes out CPS, you talk about that. So like obviously like they're very like it's something that I hadn't acknowledged as a young person, right? Like I did feel very influenced by what adults expectations were, so it's nice that already they're like we're recognizing that as like we don't need to be upheld by those expectations. um yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, and taking time. Like, is there anything that we didn't talk about that has anything to do with like your organizing experience, that you'd like to share? Especially like I know one thing I forgot to ask is with the Cop Academy opening up now under Lori Lightfoot, kind of any thoughts you have around that and the work that communities will probably continue doing to resist that.
um yeah, so people who were part of the Cop Academy campaign do get a lot of questions of like, oh, what's next? Or a lot of people who don't know that the campaign's over.
Mm,
Um, and then recently, like there was the ribbon cutting, so a lot of the no cop work starts being brought up again.
mhm,
So I think I don't know, yeah, like a lot of within no cop we talk about how just sad it is. Like we obviously know, like knew that it was probably gonna be very like hard to win it. Like it was
mhm,
low chances. And even though we acknowledge that, and even though like we know it passed, it's just like really hard to see all the shit like moving forward, like all these additions to the Cop Academy. I'm just like saying things. I think that makes me
You're
weird.
good. You're good.
But I think the main thing is just like um continuing to get involved however you can with like
on the ground organizing, but also like aldermanic races and just like your local
Mhm.
races, like the ones going on right now, and pushing to have like a more progressive um city council, but also like obviously not relying on that. Like I mentioned before, like the main thing is going to be like the coalitions and relationships that you
Mhm.
build.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the fact that also like looking at like overall like the bigger vision of like liberation, right?
Mhm.
And the bigger demand that has grown nationwide of defunding CPD, seeing like the Atlanta
Mhm.
forest campaign, the Stop Cop City campaign, um, and how like it's really upsetting that that's even a thing going on. But
Mhm.
the fact that we have things to work off, like no cop, and and yeah, just like we have each other. Like at the end of the day, like we don't have a lot, but we have each other, and that's like enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you again for sharing all of the work. And I'm so excited to see all of the beautiful stuff that you continue doing with organizing and also journalism.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
and then right before I end the recording, I have a few demographic questions. And feel free to like not answer and or to provide any answers. So what racial and or ethnic identities would you identify with?
Um. So Mexican, I guess. Is that yeah? I identify as
Yeah.
Mexican, non-black, like light skin, like Latina. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
And then gender identity.
Um. I guess gender fluid.
Okay. And then were you eligible for free and or reduced lunch or programs when you were growing up?
Maasai. I think so. Yeah. Yes.
And then what level of education did your parents complete?
Um. Like elementary school.
And then what kinds of responsibilities beyond all of the stuff that you've explained did you have after school?
Like during college or
During
high
high
school?
school? Yeah.
During high school? Um, None other than school and the ones that I mentioned. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and